Hey guys, quick heads up before I start the video. The link down below takes you to my Patreon, where you can download the project files for this video. Also gain access to my premium tutorials and in-depth courses where we build games together from start to finish. Check out my Patreon below, gain direct access to years of experience so that you can start working on your dream game tomorrow. Hi guys, and welcome back to a new episode of my multiplayer Bean Battle Royale tutorial series. So in the last episode we set up a whole interaction system, so now when the client looks at the loot crate he sees E to interact, and then the server can look at the loot crate as well and also see E to interact. Then the server can open a crate, everybody sees it opening. The client can open a crate, everybody sees it opening. We also talked about the net culling distance and how relevancy works in this picture and why we open this with using a rep notify. Then we also talked about basically the line trace. So when we start to look at objects that we can interact with, we get to see this little widget here that tells us what the interaction is. And all of this works very nicely inside of our multiplayer game. So in today's video, we are going to be working on the actual loot that's going to be shooting out of these loot crates, spawning on the floor, and then the player should also be able to interact with it using this same interaction system. And then we want to make the loot in such a way that the loot actually has physics and is replicated. So even if the loot were to spawn on a slope, which can happen since we are using a landscape like this, then we would actually want the loot to slide down the slope in case that it gets opened on a slope. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So first of all, if we take a look here inside of our assets folder, we see props, and then we see some loot that we might be spawning. So loot that we're going to be spawning is the assault rifle. I'm going to be spawning the pistol, and I'm also going to be spawning the health packs over here. Now I do have some additional items in here, so we also have a shield and a sword, but since this is a battle royale, first of all we're just going to focus on the assault rifle and the pistol and the health pack. And then once you guys understand the system like this, you can also download the project on the Patreon, and then you could also set this up spawning a sword or a shield yourself so that you get to understand how to actually work with this and set this up with best practices. Alright guys, so first of all, when working with loot, we want something to be a dynamic system. So basically what that means is we can either hardcode loot, that loot can spawn out, or we can just run this off of data and use data tables to spawn our loot. And that's what we're going to go for here, since that's easier to then basically extend this logic into the future. So if we click here on the blueprints folder, we're going to be making a new folder, and we're going to call this data. And then inside of this folder, we're going to declare a structure. So if we go here to blueprints and then we see structure, then a structure is basically what we can use to base a data table off of. So when we start to define the structure, we can define parameters such as a name of an object, the mesh that is assigned to that object, perhaps an ID that is assigned to that object, perhaps a sound effect that it needs to play when you pick it up or when you spawn it, etc. So the structure here is basically responsible for handling that. So if we open this up, and then make it full screen, then we see two tabs here, so the structure tab and the default value tab. So inside of the default value, you can declare what the value is of whatever parameters you have inside of your structure here. And inside of the structure tab here, you can actually add variables and create the structure that you like. So the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to make something of the string type. And this we're going to call it the name of the item. So simply call it name. And then next up, we're going to add something called the static mesh. So if we type in static mesh and then scroll down, then here we see static mesh. And then we want an object reference. And this one over here, we call this the SM item. So that's the static mesh for the item. Then if we go to defaults, then we want to get rid of this false. It created that false because first of all, this was a Boolean and then we converted it to a string. So there we go. And then, like I said, you could add more parameters here. So another one that could be valuable is if we do string and then type in ID. So we could use IDs. We want to put this one on top in that case. And then basically what this means is that we also want to clear this default value. Is that every item, we just want to assign it an ID so that we can easier find it later on, also identify it. Then we want to give the item a name and we want to assign a static mesh to it. Then we're going to hit save and close this, and that's all that we need for this structure for now. Then next up, we're going to right click here, go to miscellaneous, and then we see data table. So we click there, it asks us to pick a structure. And that's basically what I meant earlier. So right now, if we click here, we can type in our structure name, which we haven't named yet. So actually, let's go ahead and give this a name called as_pickup_item. So this is the structure for a pickup item. Then if we go here again to right click, miscellaneous, data table, click on none, then we can type in that name of our structure. So we type in pick, then we see pickup item. There we go. And we create the data table. Then we hit DT, which stands for data table, and then let's call it pickup items. So this is the data table for pickup items. Then we open this guy up, we can basically start to create our data in here. So I'm going to spread out these categories a little bit, just like that. And then the first thing that we're going to do is click on add here, and we'll be adding our first item here. So the first thing that you always have to do is that you actually have to give the row a name. So we see row name new. Now you cannot give that a name over here, but you can double click it here, and then we can basically give it a name. But instead of giving it a name, I'm going to give it a number, which is going to be our ID. So this one, I'm going to call it 1. And then the ID here for this one, with this one selected, is going to be 1 as well. And then we'll call this one the assault rifle. Now for the static mesh, it will be our SM static mesh assault rifle. And then we're going to add another one. We're going to call this row name 2. Then we're going to do ID 2. And this name is going to be the pistol. And then the static mesh here is going to be the static mesh of the pistol as well. So here we see SM pistol. And then the next one is going to be 3. And then this one, we're going to call it health pack. And then if we scroll down in the list here, we'll find our health pack. And there we go. Now what we do see here is that we have our own category called ID, but this row name is the actual ID. When later down the video we start to find these items, we actually use the row name for that. So the row name is the true ID, and there cannot be similar IDs in here. So if I were to add another category and try to call this one 2, which already exists, then it tells us already used as a row in this table. So this is basically our unique ID, our row name. Then we're going to delete this one, hit save, and there we go. Okay, so this is what we're going to use for later. And then right now we're going to make the item that we can basically pick up. So we're going to make these items that spawn out of here, and we're going to initialize these items with this data from this data table here. So reading the data table here, we can basically say, okay, this item has this static mesh. And when the user looks at this item, it will display the name inside of that pickup widget that we see. So if we go ahead, go over to actor, then we're going to right click, blueprint class, actor, and we're going to call this BP underscore pickup item. Then we go open this up, and here we go, compile, save. Now the first thing that we want to do is that the server is going to be spawning these items. So we're going to go to class defaults and set this guy to replicate, as this needs to be replicated. Then next up, we're going to be adding some components here instead of the component tab. So if we click plus, then we can add a static mesh. And this can just be named static mesh. And we're also going to add a capsule component. So if we type in cap, then we see capsule collision. Now the capsule collision, we're going to make that the default scene route. And then our static mesh is basically a part of the capsule collision that we see here. Then we hit compile and save. Then what we want to do is that we want to set our static mesh collision to be no collision. So if you scroll down here to the collision category, we set this to no collision over here. Hit compile, save once more. And then last thing that we want to add is the widgets that we can interact with this actor. So we click here and type widget. Then we see widget here, and that's it. Now the widget, if we select it, we want to set it to screen space, and then we want to set it to desired at size. And then for the widget class, we're going to use our interaction widget, so our interaction feedback widget that we made in the previous video. Then this, we want to put it somewhere up a little bit. And there we go. Okay, then next up, we want to basically set the collisions for our capsule. So if we select the capsule, then we want to scroll down here, and then we see that it's currently set to overlap all dynamic. What we want to set this to is block all, and then we want to go to custom, and then we want to say that for the pawn and for the physics body and for the vehicle, we want to basically disable the collision, but we also want to disable the collision for our camera and for the visibility channel, and not for the interaction channel, because that's what we need for interacting with this capsule basically. Then we hit compile and save, and there we go. So now we see that we see no item in here. So we know that if we go to the event graph that we see something called begin play. But then we do have to understand that this begin play only executes whenever you click here on the play. And what we also see is the construction script. And the construction script, for those of you who don't know, is something that if you code something here and then hit compile, then it actually executes right here inside of the editor. So I'll show you how that works right now. So from the construction script here, we're going to type in get data table row. Then we want this one, get data table row. And then out of here, we're going to select our pickup item data table. Then over here, we see that asks us for the row. So we can say row 1, 2, or 3. And then out of here comes the structure that we had predefined. So this is our pickup item structure. And then if we break this, we see that these are all the parameters, all the properties that we're looking at. So we want to get the static mesh and then initialize this static mesh. We also want to get the name and then initialize this widget. And first of all, before we do any of that, we want to know what type of ID this item has. So if we go over here to variables, then we can basically type in here item ID as a new variable. We can make this of the string type. And then we want to be able to set that value whenever we spawn this actor. So to do that, we're going to click instance editable, expose on spawn, hit compile, save. And now that we made it instance editable, if we then go here into the world, drag this in, and then over here, we see that we can now also here set the item ID. So that's great. So then we're going to grab our item ID and we're going to plug it in here. And then we hit compile, save. And then we want to set up a default value for this item ID. So in here, we're going to type in 1 because we know that that's the number 1 item that comes out of here. Then what we want to do is that we want to get our static mesh and drag off of it and type in set static mesh. There we go. Then off of row found. So if we find an item for ID 1, then we get the static mesh and then we want to set our static mesh component with this static mesh in it. So now what we will see, since this executes on construction script, if we hit compile and save, go to the viewport, we now see that we have an AK inside of this slot. So if I now were to drag this into the world, and then we see it like this, then what we know is that we can now basically adjust the value here. So if I make this a 2, click somewhere, then we see that it becomes a pistol, make it a 3, click somewhere, we see that it becomes the health bag. And there we go. So we now set up a dynamic pickup item. But then what we need next is that, well, first of all, we want these items to shoot out, and then we want these items to have some kind of a collision, like I said earlier, so that they can actually slide down the slope. So to do that, we're going to go back into the pickup item here, and then with the capsule selected, we're going to scroll down a little bit, and then over here, we simply see simulate physics. So we turn that on. Then basically, as soon as this item hits the world, it will start to simulate physics, which means it will basically slide on the floor. But then what we do have to keep in mind that if we were to do this right now, so if I put one over here, and then over here I click on simulate, then we see that it just falls down like this and just stays like that. But if I were to do this on some kind of a slope, so if we go over here, and if we get a good angle here, then hit simulate, then we see that it basically starts to roll like that. So we do not want it to roll like that. We basically want it to stay up. That is the look that I'm going for here. So what we're going to do is inside our item with our capsule selected, and now that we set simulate to true, we're going to click here on constraints, and then we basically here want to lock the X and the Y rotation, and then we hit compile, save, and there we go. So right now, if we were to go to a big slope, so let's say this slope over here, then I can drag in my pickup item above the floor, hit play, and then we see that the item will simply stay true to its rotation here, and that it will simply just slide down a little bit. So if we put it somewhere here, hit play, we just see that it slides down like that, and this is basically the look that I'm going for. So now we get a nice item that starts just falling down the slope. And also, if the landscape were to adjust, right, so in Fortnite, if players build and go up on these basically houses that they build, imagine a house like that would collapse, then this item would properly respond to this. So now we do need to make sure that this actor location is actually properly replicated. So we click on stop here, then let's delete this gun over here. Then we go back to our pickup item, and then if we click on class defaults, then under the replication settings here, we also see a category called replicate movement, and we want to set that to true. Now do keep in mind that when replicating movement, that only works for the root component here. So if you were to actually simulate physics on this static mesh, which is not the root of this actor, then this static mesh, if you were to simulate physics on this one, then this movement would not automatically be replicated. Only the root component of the actor is actually properly replicated using the replicate movement set to true. Okay, so now with the actor replicated, then I want to do the next part. So what we see is if we go over here and then drag in an item again, then what we see is that right now, if I were to just hit simulate, the item is just stuck on the floor like this. But it would be cool if the item is actually rotating. It would give it more of a game feel, basically. So I'm gonna hit stop, and then a simple way to do that is that we're simply gonna click on the plus here, and then we're gonna type in rotating. Here we see rotating movement component. So with that here, then we see that the default value is set to a rotational rate of 180. So now if we hit compile and save, then if we hit play, then we see that the actor actually starts to rotate. So this is now nice because it gives it a bit more of a gamey feel. So then next up, what we want to do is that we want to set up the proper interaction with this actor. So like we did in last episode, we're basically just going to take a look at this actor here. So what we see is that first of all, we had a setup interaction widget function. So what we can do here is that we right click this function, copy, go to the pickup item, right click, paste function. And for those of you that missed it, we can basically see the whole function over here. So we get the widget, we drag out of it, type in get widget, there we go. Then we cast to our widget and call the event that we installed on it called update widget. Now what we do see is that for the loot crate, we basically set it up that it always is named loot crate, which is fine because the loot crate is just one item. But for the pickup items, since these can be any item based on the data table, this needs to be set up based on the actual name of the item. So if we go over here into the construction script, then we see that we have a name here. So we're gonna drag off of it, promote this to a variable, and simply call it name, that's fine. And hook it up, hit compile and save, and there we go. So now if we go back into our little function here, then instead of typing the name in here, we just want to get our variable and plug that name in here so that it sets up with the correct name. And there we go. So then if we go to the event graph here and drag in that function, set that up on begin play, then we can drag in a couple of items into the world to test it. This one we call 2, and this one we call 3, and hit play. Then we see that they set up with their correct name. So we got now a health bag, a pistol, and an assault rifle. So that's great. Now we just need to set up the proper interaction like we did in last video. So we take a look here at the loot crate. We see the event interact and the event here for set focused. So first of all, we're going to go over here, click on class settings, and then add our interaction interface that we made in the previous episode. So here's the BPI interaction. Then under interfaces here, we open this up. Then we see the two events that we're looking for. So we're just going to double click them, double click. And then the first one is going to be our set focus. So we're going to copy this from our loot crate and paste it into here. So for those of you that missed this setup, I recommend looking at the previous episode, part 16, in which we basically set this all up. And then hit compile save. And then we do know that the widget here, we need to set the default value here of the visibility to not be visible. So down at the rendering category, see visible, turn that off. And then hit compile save, and let's test it out. So we got our little AK here right now. If I look at it, it says assault rifle. If I look at it, it says assault rifle. And there we go. So then next up, we actually need to make sure that these loot crates start to spawn these items. So we open up our pickup item, and then we can basically conclude that this is it for now. So in the next video, we're going to be actually handling this event interact. So when the player looks at this item, presses E, then the player basically needs to equip the item or get it in some kind of an inventory perhaps. So we'll see what we set up there. But yeah, that picking up of the item we're going to do in the next video, because this is about spawning them. So what we're going to do now is delete this AK. And then we need to work further on our loot crate here. So all of this logic we set up in the previous video. And then over here, we basically see that we have our wrap notify. So when it opens here, so we call this event open crate, which takes us here. And this actually turns the lid to be open. And now what we want to do is that we want to also use this event interact to basically spawn our items at random. So these loot crates, they need to spawn, let's say that they spawn 3 items each. Then we want to give them chances for what they spawn. And perhaps they don't always spawn 3 items, perhaps they just spawn 1 item or 2. And then whichever item it is that they spawn, we want to base that off of chances and then basically have the items spawning. So if we take a look here at the loot crate, then we basically see that, well, we had the wrap notify, which actually opens the crate, and then we have the cosmetic event here, which executes once. So since this is basically an event that needs to happen once on the server, so the server spawns a replicated actor, then we don't have to do that inside of the wrap notify here, but we can actually just do that here directly off of the event interact. So not off of the MC, not off of the wrap notify, but just directly here off of this one. So we're going to make ourselves a little new custom event, and we're simply going to call this spawn items. And we do not have to set this to replicate in any sorts. It can just be an offline event. And why? Well, because as we know, the event interact gets executed on the server. So for those of you who missed that, if we go to the game modes and then to our core character, then we see that this is how we basically interact. So we press E, then from our local character, we go to the server. Server calls the interact event, which means here we are still on the server, which means if the server here is to call our little spawn items event, then here we are still on the server, which basically means that if we spawn an item on the server, which is a replicated item, everybody will see it. It will simply exist in the world. Even for players that connect later, these items will just exist inside of that world. And that is why this is simply enough. So now over here, we need to write some code so that the items actually spawn. So yet again, like we did many times, so for spawning the loot on the island here, or for spawning the players, if we open up our airplane, inside of our airplane here, we use the little trick that we use some kind of a volume, and then inside of that volume, we randomly spawn the players, or in this case here, we randomly spawn the loot crates, and then they basically get spawned on the landscape. And so we're going to use that trick again. So we open up our airplane, then go to the event graph, then we see here the spawn player function that we made. And then over here, we see these functions here. So world location, and then we say random point in bounding box. So we're going to hit Control Copy, go to our loot crate, and then Control Paste. There we go. Then inside of our viewport here, we're going to basically be making that little volume. So we type in collision, then we want a little box collision here. Gonna drag it out and a bit on top here. So somewhere like this would be fine, I guess. Let's see, like that. Then we're gonna scale it a little bit. So we want to make it a bit wider. Oh, that's way too wide. So let's type in something like 200. No, let's do 100. Yeah. So 100 by, let's say, 50. Okay. Yeah, so there we go. So that works for me. Then with this volume selected, we can basically rename it. So let's call this spawning volume. And then we want to set the collision to no collision. Go to the event graph and then drag this volume in. Then this volume goes into here. And then off of the volume, we're going to drag out and type in get extend. Then we want to get the unskilled extend. I plug that straight into here. Check out Cactus Center right now on Steam and Early Access. It's a very fun multiplayer video game, cheaper than a Starbucks coffee. So if you want to have a good time with your friends or strangers, click that link down below. And I appreciate every single one of you. And enjoy the rest of the video. Bye. And then the logic, so what do we want to do here? Well, we want to basically spawn items and we want to do it a certain amount of times. But however many times we want to do it is up to chance, right? And the items that we want to spawn is also up to chance. So basically, if we hold down N and then left click, we get a do N. Now, if you cannot find it like that, you can also just right click and type in flow control. Then over here we see do N. So we want to do something a random amount of times. So perhaps 1 time, perhaps 2 times, perhaps 3 times. So we're going to type random integer in range, and it's going to go from 1 to maximum 3 amount of items. We're going to plug that in here, and then we're going to say if the counter is equal to our random number that we had here, then we basically want to stop. And then this logic, we cannot do it like this because out of the exit, this is going to generate a new random one. So basically need to store that. So we're going to drag off of here, type in promote, and then loot spawn amount. Here we go. So we're going to hook this variable up and then disconnect this cable and then put this one into here. So we're going to generate a loot spawn amount. There we go. And then we're going to say, okay, if we did this equal to the amount of loot that we want to spawn, then we're done. If not, then we want to do it again. And then in between here, so if I basically put this like this, then in between here is basically where we want to execute our logic. So the logic that we want to execute is spawning the items. So if we right click and type in custom event, and then we call this something like spawn actual item, right? Then we can get that down here. Over here at spawning the actual item is where we need to use this logic. So here we're gonna basically drag off and type in spawn actual item. And that's this logic over here. So this logic spawns us the actual item, the amount of times that we randomly generated here. Now do keep in mind this all just still happens on the server. And then over here we want to drag off and type in spawn actor from class. And now the actor that we want to spawn is the actor that we had previously made. So it's our pickup item. So if we click here and type in pickup item, then there we go. And then we see that the item ID gets exposed here. So if we go over to the item, open this up, then we saw that we made the item ID, we made it instance editable exposed on spawn. So that's the reason that it appears over here. So in here, we want to plug in a random item ID because we want to spawn it randomly. And then, well, just let's go down line first. So we want to spawn it at a transform. So if we drag out of here, click on make transform, then off of our logic here, this is basically going to be that location. And for the rotation and the scale, we can simply just leave it at 0 and at 1. Now for the collision handling, we want to set that to, let's see here, try to adjust location, but always spawn. And then for the item ID, so we want to spawn a random item. So the way that we can do that is that we can basically, so we type in get data table row. Then this time we can do row names. And then if we plug in our data table here for pickup items, so this basically out of here returns us all of the available item row names. So what we can do with that, if you actually want to set this up random, we can just drag off here and type in random array item. So this returns a random array item. And keep in mind these row names, if we look at our data table, then we know that we set them up as numbers here. And the numbers are equal to the ID basically. So if 2, then it will spawn a pistol. If 3, it will spawn a health pack. If 1, it will spawn an assault rifle. So what we could do is that we could simply plug it in like this, and then like this, and then this guy in here. And now it would just spawn us a random item. But now it does not spawn us a random item based off of chances. So if we want to make a certain item basically less available than another item, then we can also set up some different logic. But first, let's have a look at this. So inside of our world, we now see that our boxes have this nice collision volume here above them that spawns the loot. So I'm just going to do one player, walk up to the crate, and then we're going to press E. So there we go. Now we see that the crate is opened and it spawned us a pistol, an assault rifle, and a pistol. Now this crate spawns us a pistol, assault rifle, health pack, and this guy spawns us assault rifle, health pack, health pack. There we go. So now they just randomly spawn, as I just explained, but perhaps you want to do it based off of chances. So if you want to base this off of actual chance instead, then what you need to do is that you basically want to declare what the odds are, what the chances are that you would spawn a certain item. So a nice dynamic way to do that is that we basically would adapt our pickup item structure. And then inside of our data table, we want to basically set a percentage of the spawn percentage, right? So what would something like that look like? Well, then we would first have to adjust our structure. So if we open up our structure and then over here, we can then make a float. And we can call this float something like drop or spawn percentage. So we call it spawn percentage. Then the default value is set to 0. There we go. Then now inside of our data table, we see that we got that new parameter here for spawn percentage. So what we can do is we can set the health pack to, let's say, 50%. And then the pistol here, we can set it to 90%. And then the assault rifle, we can set it to 10%, just for some random parameters, right? Then if we go back to our loot crate here, then what we want to do is that we basically want to type in get data table row. And then we want to get this one. And then with this one, we want to set it to our pickup items. Okay, so now what we want to do is that then, let's put this up here and this one here, hook this up. So we want to get a random item from our data table. And then that's the item that we're going to get. But then before we say that that's the actual item that we're going to get, we're going to drag out of here. We're going to look at that spawn percentage. And then what we're going to say is that we're going to type in random float in range from, let's say, 0 to 100. So we want a random float in range 0 to 100, and we want to see if the random float that we generate here, so let's say that this is 10, then we want to see if it is basically below or equal to the spawn percentage. So is this one lower, less, or equal? You can also literally type in less or equal than our spawn percentage. So if this one generates 10 and our spawn percentage is 10, then we basically hit it. But if here we generate 30 or 60 or 90, which is a 90% chance that we would generate any of those numbers, then we say, okay, we did not meet the spawn percentage. It was not within the spawn percentage, so we don't want to spawn this one. So if we hold B and left click to get a branch, then what we're going to say is if it is less or equal than this, then we want to spawn this guy. If not, then we want to do it all over again. But with all over again, I mean get a whole new item. So we're going to go off of here and get a whole new item, because apparently we did not spawn this item. So then it hook up this and then hook up this and this one like that. This logic can go back here and there we go. So now if we hit compile and save, then basically let's go over it one more time. So when the player interacts on the server, we spawn an item. We do it a random amount of times. So the loot crate might spawn 1 item or 3. And then we spawn the actual item. Then here we get a random item. We read what the spawn percentage is. We generate a random number, see if it is equal or less than the spawn percentage. If true, then we basically want to spawn that item. If false, we want to do it all again and get a new item and see if we met that spawn percentage requirement. And then of course inside of the item ID here, if it is true, then the ID that we have here goes in here, because that's the item that we then want to spawn. And there we go. So now we can go ahead and hit play. So we now have a 10% chance for an assault rifle, 50% chance for a health pack, and a pistol was, I don't know, a high chance. So then, okay, so we now see that it spawned 1 pistol, this one 2 health packs, and this one, oh, so we got an assault rifle, so that's cool. So now we have a special item here, basically. All right, guys, so that's basically how we can set up the chances here. Then now we can go ahead and simply test this in multiplayer real quick. So if we hit 2 players and then listen server, hit play, then we get our client on the left here, server on the right. So we walk up to the loot crates. Let's also get the server up to the loot crates. And then we're going to have the server open this one. So server opens and then the client and the server both see something else. So how come that they both see something else right now? So the server sees the correct one and the client sees only the assault rifle. But then if we open this one, then we see that the server sees a pistol and also a health pack. And the client only sees 2 of these assault rifles. But the client does see only 2, so it does spawn the correct amount and it spawns it in the correct location. So the reason that this doesn't work properly is that we have been using the construction script so far. So if we find our actor here, pickup items, then we have been using this construction script here. And this construction script uses an item ID, which is set to 1 here. But obviously the item ID here is not replicated. So right now what we see in the event graph is that basically the server executes this, server then spawns an item and the server simply plugs it in and then sends the ID here. So now the server construction script sets up with the correct ID, but the client always with 1. So what we want to do is that we want to select our item ID and set this to replicate. And what we want to do is that we now want to basically remove this script here from the construction script and move it over to the begin play. But what you can also do is you can also keep it additionally in the construction script so that when you drag in an item here, that you do actually also have the opportunity to set them up here. So if you want to hand place some items, so this one here, make it a number 3, and this one, make it a number 2. Then if we were to hit play, then hand-placed items do properly work off of the construction script. So here we do see that we basically both the client here on the left and then the server here on the right, they both see the correct items. Because when you hand-place them, then they are basically just programmed like that, right? So installed into the level like that. So we installed these into the level with an ID of 3 and an ID of 2. So the client also knows this and there's no replication needed for that. So we actually can say that we do want to keep it here inside of the construction script, but we also want to copy it over to the begin play so that it works properly in multiplayer. So for that, we're going to basically then right click, collapse to function, and let's call it simply setup_item. And then this function, we're going to copy it here to our begin play as well. And then one last thing is that, of course, if we take a look here at the logic, we set up the name over here. And then what we see in the event graph is we set up the widget. So the widget for the interaction, we set that one up over here. So now this one is going to set up on a name that only gets basically set here. So we do want to make sure that's because the chronologic order here is now basically taking its play. So we do want to make sure that we want to basically call this first, and then this function, we can basically call it in here afterwards. So we can do it over here. So this way we now make sure that on begin play, we basically get all of the data that for this item. And then once we got all the data, we then want to set up our interaction widget here. And that's it. Then if we hit compile and save, then hit play, then we can now give it one final and proper test. So we got our server on the right, we got our client here on the left. Both of them properly see the items that we had pre-installed. We also see the names properly. So now we have the server opening the loot crate. We see here a pistol spawning and a health pack. At these exact locations, the client also sees a pistol and a health pack. Then the client opens this one. We see 2 pistols. The server also sees it. Client opens this one and 2 pistols again, and the server also sees it. So if you want to adjust your chances, then obviously you can now easily use the data table. But we see that, yeah, everything works fine. And there we go. So let's go ahead, test this in the actual Battle Royale, see if items can also spawn on slopes. And then that's it for this video. All right, so we're both here inside of the airplane. So here on the left, we got our little client basically. So client is going to jump out. Then we're going to have to find a loot crate. So let's see, I see one over there and one over here. So the client basically parachutes to this loot crate here. Then let's get the server over here as well. So server jumps out of airplane. And then let's find our client. Oh, there we are. So here we go. Woo. Okay. So server and client both see this loot crate on the same location. So then the client can simply open it. And there we go. Oh, so we got great loot, an assault rifle, pistol, and a health pack. Now let's find one that's on the slope. So we got this one over here, which is kind of on the slope. So we can see that the actual physics also start to take place. So we're going to have the server open it. Boom, we get a pistol. And it basically slides down the hill a little bit. So that's pretty cool. Maybe we can find one that's on an even more steeper angle. Let's take a look. Okay, so I found this guy over here. So this is on a pretty steep hill. So let's put the server something like this, that we can properly see it open, or I don't know. Yeah, let's do it something like this. And then let's have the client open it. So then we can see that the items actually fall down the slope. So here we go. And there they go. So now we see that both the server and the client properly see these items falling down. Now they are fully replicated. They are in sync. We both see the assault rifle and our little pistol here. Yeah, and that way you can really make a fun experience here inside of your multiplayer Battle Royale game. Alright guys, that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be actually be picking the items up. So when we spawn them, then we can actually press E to equip them or pick them up somehow. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and subscribe. That really helps out my channel a lot. If you want to get easy access to this project, then you can download it on my Patreon. You will get access to the full project that we have over here inside of the video tutorials. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.